Hey everyone, this is my second part of my series on the COVID crisis. It is called How to Make Art. And it's just a lot of that free time that you're having that you don't know what to do with. Maybe making art is something that you would like to do. I actually, about 3 or 4 months ago, was starting to make these huge canvases for an office expansion. And they were highly abstract, although I was moving more toward representational work. And my wife challenged me and said, "Hey, why don't you do a picture of our dog Kumo?" And she said, "I'm warning you that most times it doesn't even look like the dog or anything else." So once I did that in watercolor, slightly abstracted, I started getting some confidence that I could do art. So about 3.5 months ago, I started doing more portraits. Maybe it's my fascination with the face, since I do facial plastic surgery and hair transplant surgery. But I think it's the highest art for me, and it's something that I really enjoy the expression and the challenge of portraiture. So what I was wanting to do is talk to you about some pearls. If you're interested in starting to do art, what books or resources I've used to learn my way around, because I simply don't have any formal academic training. I've been painting abstract acrylics for about 15 years, and you probably see them around my building. But portraits and realistic representational work, I really haven't done. So YouTube is my friend, and buying professional equipment, materials is also very important. So, one thing I like to do is talk about some principles of if you're going to do portraiture. Now, of course, you can do anything you want, but I think I want to start with that because that's my focus of my specialty of what I found. This lady, Sylvie Madal, I think Silvie Mahdal, I believe, on YouTube had a series on graphite pencil drawings. And if you're interested in doing graphite pencils, definitely first buy a whole set of graphite pencils. You need to not just use one pencil. You cannot get any level of depth or color changes, which I'll talk about in a minute. But watch her videos if you're interested in graphite pencil. For me, I did a few graphite pencils, but I just love color, so I couldn't go deeper into that discipline. But with what Sylvie said is that this is what blew my mind. My first outings with some watercolors that I was doing with portraits, I was outlining things, and outlining things makes your portraits look like cartoons. What she said is that there are no outlines or lines in nature. That just blew my mind, which is so obvious in retrospect, and that changed everything of how I did things. So that's the first thing, is there are no outlines. Of course, you first have to outline everything so you have the drawing accurately rendered, which is another point. But what is really the focus is tonal values. In other words, how dark something is in retrospect on the black to white scale. And that's one of the reasons why, if you're going to do graphite pencil, you need all the way from 2H over to 6B, B being blacker and softer and less refined, but you need that range to create the value changes. And if you're doing watercolor and you like portraits, watch Stan Miller. This guy is amazing. What a genius in terms of what he does with watercolors. And I personally love the Holbein set from Japan. I actually ordered them a whole set from eBay, 108 set of Holbein watercolors. But Stan Miller really emphasizes that when you're doing portraits in particular, but anything, that value, and value defines how dark something is, how dark or light something is what you really want to capture. And so looking at value is critical, not the color per se. You can have fun with the color, even if you're doing a portrait, is what he argues. You just want to make sure the values are captured correctly. It's funny. Whenever I look at people now, I'm having a conversation, I'm actually looking at their light, of how light strikes their face. And so it's so interesting. The other pearl is, if you get a reference photo, if you're not drawing from life, your photo must have a lot of values in it. If you use a washed out reference photo that has really no value to it, then you're not going to be able to really get the right depth and three-dimensionality of that person. You need to capture both what's called the key shadow, with the main shadow point going across, as well as reflected shadow, because sometimes you'll have light, either a secondary light source or a bounce of light off a background, and that those value changes in a photograph are so important. So you have to have a great reference photo. And in that reference photo, you also don't want the reference photo to be distorted, because a lot of times iPhones and things like that, especially if they're shot at a certain angle, may make the nose too large, and then you're going to try to render that looking realistic or correct, and it's not going to be right. So you want the proportions to be correct, the lighting to be correct, as I mentioned, and you also want to have the reference photo to be in focus. So a lot of times you get this really grainy photograph, and you really can't capture the details if that's what you're trying to achieve. So those are some basic principles. Another principle is, work on the forms. So in other words, before I embark on starting the painting process, I spent a long time, and I've progressively gotten much faster now, is using a graphite pencil to draw out the basic underlying shape of the eyes, the nose, the outlines that will be covered up with the tonal values of the painting. But don't rush through the initial drawing. Look back and forth. Challenge your eye and hand to look back and forth and see, is the shape right? Is my nose too close to the eye? And what I'll do sometimes, so I'll use an iPad. I use the very large iPad. I can't remember the dimensions of it. And I blow up the image as big as I can, and try to copy it 1-to-1 for my portraits. It makes it a lot easier in my mind's eye to see something 1-to-1 as a reference photo. And I will try to draw that as accurately as possible, and be, sometimes I've drawn half the face and I've got to erase the whole thing because one part, the nose, is slightly off to the eye, and then I've got to redraw the whole thing all the way down to the mouth. So something is off. So that's so important, is to really look for your proportions before you embark, and spend that time to erase, draw, look back and forth. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll hold a pencil with my finger and look at the distance for the forehead through the nose, and then the nose to the chin, just to make sure it's accurate. And the hardest thing I do is double portraits. I just finished this 6x4 foot double portrait of my parents, and very hard. I think the head is slightly too big on my dad, but it's almost expressionistic, so I'm not so worried about it. But I use a pencil and I go back and forth, and it's very hard to have a double portrait, because then you got to have both heads proportionally correct, and then they have to be proportional on the body and then proportional to the background. So there's all these elements that are there. And I've done all the different media. I've just had a big blast doing watercolor to charcoal to graphite pencil to now just did acrylic portrait to color pencil. Did I mention that already? And pastels. And pastels are just glorious. My favorite right now is a brand called Schminke, Schminke. And if you watch this lady, Bogra Art Studios, her pastels are simply gorgeous. And pastels have the highest degree of chroma. Chroma simply means the saturation of the color. I just absolutely love the way that pastels are presented on canvas or on paper. Mainly paper is what I use it on. Just absolutely stunning. And watercolors, watch Stan Miller, really learn the techniques well. Color pencil is the most arduous, difficult, laborious medium that you're going to find, and I love the challenge. I was doing a lot of photorealistic work that took maybe 30 hours of work to try to replicate, whereas pastels are a much quicker medium to work with. But if you want to do pastel portraits, go watch the Bogra Art Studios. This Bulgarian woman. It's amazing. I can't remember her name. Graciela or something like that. Just Bogra. If you're looking for color pencil, this lady, this Russian woman, Aloyna Nicholson, I think Aloyna, just in Nicholson, has a great couple books. I've read her books, watched a couple of videos on YouTube as well. So basically everything I got were from books and YouTube, since I have no formal training. But oftentimes it's enough to really begin your journey. She's just incredible. And then another one I just finished, Karen Hull, Hull, a book on really photorealistic color pencils. If you're really obsessive with realism, you should read those. Understand color theory. To me, I just hate color theory because I just love color, and I just want to My eye is very good with color. I can see something and I know that the colors are going to work or not going to work. I don't need the theory behind it. But if you're just starting out there and you're wanting to understand, you need to understand color theory better, and you need to understand proportion and all these things, especially if you're trying to do more realistic work. Get professional grade oil paints, professional grade acrylic paints, get professional everything, because it's worth that slight degree of premium. They're going to be more archival. They're going to be more densely saturated in color. Sometimes you don't need to use as much product. I'm actually now moving away from photorealism toward an expressionistic style. I think it's always worth diving deep into photorealism just to test your hand at it. But I love the expression of almost like German expressionism, or just the feeling, or post-impressionism, just getting a feeling of your hand. So I hope this little primer will give you some encouragement to do some work. I actually just got my first commission from a friend of mine because she's so obsessed with my work online. And I may actually create a little secondary business here creating my work. You can look at some of my work on Instagram or on Facebook or those other sites. You can look at some of my portraits. I try to show you the development process that I'm doing. Of course, I'm very junior to this. I'm new to this. This is not someone that's been doing it for 10 years or has had several years of schooling, but I hope this is some encouragement for you to embark on your time in your journey of creativity during this COVID crisis.